Hey friends! So I'm not sure I should be doing this video really, because this week I struggled to memorise a 4-verse poem when usually I'm like 10-minute poems in the bag. But people ask me quite often how I memorise long poems, like is there any tips I can give on memorising poems? And when I was first writing poetry, I just spent all my time doing it. I was really ill when I started writing, and so I wasn't doing anything other than the poems, and so a lot of my earlier poems, it was just because I lived it. I didn't think or speak about anything other than these poems. But obviously, as I've kind of gone on my road to recovery through this mental health journey, I have had to learn how to memorise poems, because I'm still writing them. They're still long because for some reason I have still too much to say, and I have to get them in my head somehow. So yeah, there are things that I do that do work, and I thought might as well share them. Some of them will be dead obvious, some of them maybe you won't have thought of. Hopefully they'll be helpful to you if you're trying to memorise things, not even just poems, just like speeches, scripts, whatever. This would work for that too. So I think the main thing to start with is that you do have to be persistent and patient, because it will not learn itself. It is possible to learn it, but it will not learn itself. You do have to learn it yourself. And you can be learning it in the bath, in the shower, oh my feet are wet, on the toilet, and in bed. But first of all, let's start with writing the poem. So for me, the writing part of the poem provides quite a big part of memorising it. It goes in as you're writing it anyway. You're the one coming up with the words. It's in there. You're the one making this happen. So don't worry too much, because they're coming from your brain, so they're in your brain. We're good. We've got a good start. But for me, because I'm writing long poems, I tend to go back to the beginning and write from the beginning again quite often. So if I've started writing the poem and I've got to a point where I've kind of stopped and I'm really thinking about the next bit before I write it, I find that's a good point to go back to the beginning and start writing it out again from the beginning. What I've already written, don't rewrite it unless you really particularly don't like it and you want to rewrite it. But write out what you've written already, get back to the point you're at again before you carry on writing. And the more you just go back and rewrite it out, the more it's going to go in. It's a massive waste of paper, but I mean, as writers, we're not exactly saving trees, are we? And then once I've finished the poem, and it's all done, and I've written it out loads of times whilst I've been writing it, I then write it up fully in a separate book. I have certain books for like performances, so books I would take if I don't know the poem off by heart to have in my hand as a prompt. So I write it into one of those books so that I can take it to gigs. At this point, I would try to write it from memory. And obviously if I get stuck, I just look at the line and then try to write from memory again, and that helps to learn it as well. And then I also write it into a separate book, but that's just because I have a book that my parents have of all my poems, and so that helps because I'm writing it out again and again. I'll try and do it from memory. The more times that you can write it out and the more that you can try and write it from memory, the more it's going to sink in. And then I type it up again, if I can, from memory. I have all of my poems on my wall, so I type it up and print it and put it there, and then I also print a copy for a folder that I have. So yeah, typing it up, try and do it from memory, and if you get stuck, just look at the line, but don't get stuck and then look at the rest of the poem to type it up. Get stuck, prompt yourself with a line, and then go back to trying to remember it, and just look when you need to. And then after all the writing and the typing, I start rehearsing it. So stand up in your room in front of your imaginary audience. Thank them all for coming, and just let them know that they're gonna have to bear with you because it's a brand new poem and you might fuck it up. Have your written version of your poem to hand in case you do forget. And again, if you forget a line whilst you're performing this poem to your audience, then look at the line. Don't look at the rest of the poem, don't give up. Just look at what you need to know to prompt you to keep going. And I would just do this as many times as you can. But what is important is to say take breaks. Don't just expect yourself to do it over and over and over again and for it to sink in. You've got to take breaks and let yourself absorb information. Obviously don't push yourself to a point of insanity just going over and over this poem. Take lots of breaks in between. But when you are rehearsing it in front of your audience, have it to hand, use it as a prompt when you need it, and you should be able to use it less and less and less as you do more and more rehearsals, performances in front of your audience that doesn't exist. Don't forget to push yourself to try and remember a line that you've forgotten before you look at it. Take your time. There's not really an audience in front of you, and even if there was, it would be a poetry audience, so they'd be super supportive and they'd be clicking for you to remember your line for as long as you needed. So you take as long as you need and try and get the line back without having to look, and then last resort, look for the line. Now I tend to find that writing it out loads of times and then rehearsing it a lot of times, reading it through in the book, I find that the words on the pages become like images in my head, and it helps me to recall it in the right order because I can kind of picture it in the book in my mind. So that helps, and you might find that works for you as well if you're writing it out and rehearsing it as much as I do. And also my poems tend to be quite chronological, like they tell a story. And so if I remember the story, it makes it easier to recall the poem. So if your poems are stories, just make sure you know the story like the back of your hand, and then it'll be easy to know what's next. Okay, this next point is a huge one. I find this fantastic. Record yourself saying the poem. It can be a video, but it doesn't have to be. You can just record your voice saying the poem and then listen to it back. Hearing it back is huge for it sinking in. And you can just have it in your ears and you can be listening to it whilst you're doing anything. So whilst you're on the toilet, you could be listening to it back. You could be listening to it back before you go to bed, which I'm going to come to that in a minute because that's a really great time to rehearse your poems. You could be doing it whilst you're going for a walk, whilst you're cleaning up your house, anything, but listen to yourself saying that poem. Really useful. Back to the before bed thing. Now I don't know if this is a proven fact because I feel like I've heard it before and that it is actually true that if you rehearse things before you go to bed, they sink in overnight. I might have made that up though, so don't quote me, but it does work for me. I'm not saying stand up in front of your imaginary audience at like 11 PM before you close your eyes, but maybe just read through it in the book or try and go through it as best as you can without the book. Not long before you're gonna rest and sleep, or just like read through it in the book like your nighttime reading before you put your head down to sleep. I tend to find that I'll literally head on pillow about to go to sleep and I'll start going through some poems, and it just helps me. I feel like it sinks in overnight, like once I'm not consciously thinking about it. So doing some sort of rehearsal of it before bed, I think, is a really great tool to use. Go for a walk and rehearse it on your walk. You could either do the whole headphones in, listen to yourself reciting it thing, or I actually recite my poems out loud whilst I'm walking and get really out of breath, which might suit you, or you could just go through them in your head. I know sometimes when you're out walking, if you come across other people, you don't really want to be talking to yourself, but tend to find if you're talking to yourself, people leave you the fuck alone anyway. Apart from one time I did have a lady stop. I feel like it must have been because I was reciting my poems to myself, and she pulled over and she was like, "You all right, love?" But now we have masks, don't we? So you can cover your face and no one will know you're even talking to yourself. So go for a walk, put your mask on, recite your poems. And finally, you have to believe in yourself that you can do it. I think if we start something not really believing that we can do it, oh, it's a windy day. If we start something not believing that we can do it, we put an automatic blockage up. If we start I thought it would be a nice end to the video sitting outside rather than inside. Regret it now. If we start something by not believing that we're going to be able to do it, we just put this automatic blockage up, and there's no need for it because you can do it. It's possible to memorise your poems. You will do it. And so believe it from the start, and that will be half the battle, is just believing you can do something most of the time. One of my favourite quotes is, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Nice one, Nelson. And I think it's so true. And then once you've got this poem solidly in your memory, you'll be like, it is possible. It is possible when it's done, isn't it? I've just sat on a wet bench, so I'm gonna go now. Thanks for watching.